we're going to start. I'd like to get back on track. We try to keep everything moving. We got a tight times table here. So our next speaker, Richie's going to come up here. He's going to cover a little bit on recovery and humor and having fun in that, and that's pretty cool. Waiting for Bill to get up here and start his taping so you don't miss anything. We will be passing the baskets in a couple minutes when Richie gets up here. This is totally, we put this on totally free, but there's absolutely nothing free in the world. I mean, there's a great amount of expense and work that goes in behind this. So, if we can, what's that? Can we slow it down a little bit? All right, ready to start? All right, let's go. Welcome, Richie. Richie, get up here.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everybody. My name is Richie. I am definitely an alcoholic, among other things. So, thank you for asking me, Ron, to come be a part of the day. I was talking to some people beforehand, and these days, these kinds of conventions for me, early days, even though I had no interest at all in coming, and my sponsor dragged me to them, actually turned out to be very important for me to connect with the fellowship in this way. Especially with the kind of people that put these things on and the stories that you hear, and it's the stuff that can kind of open you up a little bit, even when you don't want to be opened up. So thank you guys for putting it on, Ron. This is good work, and for everybody who made this happen and made this real. And I also understand, it's funny you say that about the money, because I thought to myself, I had to go look at the thing that you sent, and I'm like, is this cost dough? Like, I mean, how much does it cost to go to this day-long thing? And I saw no money on there. I said, oh, they're doing it for free. Cool. If it's for free, it's for me. But like you say, there's no free, and so I'll make sure I kick a little something in the basket. So anyway, so thanks for asking me to speak. I always start off kind of the same way. I'm told to. I have to. So my sobriety date is October 24th, 1996. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I sponsor a bunch of guys. My home group is the Ridgefield Park Young People's Meeting in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. It's about 2 hours from here. If you ever are in the neighborhood, Tuesday nights, 8:30 p.m., please stop on by. So, a couple of few things, disclaimers. I'm just going to throw out some disclaimers. One of my favorite disclaimers to throw out is that this is primary purpose. I appreciate primary purpose, and for any of the stalwart, the guys in here were like primary purpose, and this is for alcoholism. I respect that, but I am duly addicted, and I don't pretend that I'm not, and I never will, and I never have. I won't talk about, crawling around at 2 o'clock in the morning and crushing a plasterboard and snorting it or any of that nonsense. None of you would even know what I was talking about. But I am duly addicted, and I say that because in our big book, in the very first qualification of AA, Bill Wilson himself found himself in the end of his story drinking and taking sedatives, and that combination soon landed him on the rocks, and people feared for his sanity, and he was 40 pounds underweight when he came in. So if it's good enough for Bill, and Dr. Bob, by the way, also was popping sedatives in his story in our big book, and so if it's good enough for them to mention, then I think it's good enough for me to mention as well, especially so you know that you're not alone, and many of us suffer from lots of different problems. Having said that, laughter in recovery is, I guess, a topic kind of, but really I'm just going to tell my story. But laughter in recovery is important. And, the big book talks about how some people would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity. And people here understand that, because some of the stuff that we do and some of the things that we've gone through are nothing short of insane. And yet we find a way to, somehow there's humor in that with people like us, and sometimes it's dark humor. And when we get sober, we start finding humor in a lot of things that we maybe weren't able to find humor in before. And one of those things, I'm going to share a story. I'm going to share a lot of stories because I'm a story guy. I could quote the big book. I could quote the big book page and verse. I've read it 800 times over 21 years. I know page 23 says this and page 29 says that. I've never found that. I found it helpful for the first 4 years where I came in and I would just rip up a meeting. My goal when I went in to speak early sobriety, and if there's any of you who are out there that are like now, the young guns, I still like it. I mean, I don't do it anymore, but my goal in speaking would be to get at least 20% of the people in here to leave in anger. If you're not pissing off a quarter of the room, you're not speaking right. You're holding back. And Schroeder just told me before I came up, he goes, it's no Governor Saturday, so let it loose, no holds barred. I said, you do not want that from me. And his wife said, remember, you're in a church. I said, exactly. I'm going to try not to curse, although that is a big thing for me. So anyway, I wanted to share. I brought my big book, and I didn't bring my big book for a reason that you might think. I brought my big book because I was thinking about laughter and recovery, and this is something that happened to me, and once I realized what had occurred, it made me laugh, and so I figured I would share it with everybody to start off. So I was on my way to work one day, and this is maybe 8 months ago, and I was on my way to work, and I go out to my car, and I've got 2 coffee things, the baby bag, also, I'm juggling everything, I'm opening the thing, and as I was getting ready, I had my big book because I was going to be working with someone later on, and I put it on the roof of my car yeah, you know how the story ends. That's great. You think that's funny. You're very sick. And so I put the book on the car, and I put everything in, and I drove to work. Now, it's not no big deal because this big book is the first big book that my sponsor gave to me when I first came in the rooms, and I went through the work in this book. And I've had it rebound several times over 21 years. This is my Working with Others book. It's got all my notes in it. It means a lot to me. I would pay, and I shouldn't say this out loud with you people, but I'd pay a high ransom for this book if you managed to get a hold of it. And so this book means a lot. And I've actually had some of you old-time spiritual gurus tell me over the years, you shouldn't worship the book or the process. It's God, and you should just throw that book away and get a new one. I'm like, yeah, right. That's never going to happen. Well, apparently God had other plans, and the interesting thing is, so I put the book on the roof, and I didn't know, and I drove to work, and I'm on highways doing 80 miles an hour, and you can imagine what occurs, but you see the book is here, which is weird. I pull into work, I back into my spot, I go upstairs on the 3rd floor, and one of the guys is in the kitchen getting coffee, and I walk in the kitchen, and he goes, hey, bro, and I said, what's up? He goes, why is there a book on your roof? And I was like, oh my God! I said, are you serious? And I was like, oh my God, and I ran downstairs, and there's my book. It blew to the back, but it was on the rack, and it was still there. And I'm like, yes! And I open it up, and a big chunk is gone. It's a big chunk, pages 69 to 96, are gone out of my book. And I'm like, no. And I had a lot of little pages in here. Amends cards that I had completed a long time ago that I use as examples for my sponsees. I had a few new amends cards in there from my most recent trip through, which I keep in the big book because I always see them and I'm like, you got to make that amends. And so I lost so much stuff out of the book, and I said, you know what? I'm going looking for it. So I said, I'm leaving, I'm coming back. And I drove the entire opposite route back to my house. And I get down by my street where I first started driving, and I'm like, ooh, a piece of paper. And I'm literally walking down the street, and I find my second step directions. I'm like, yes! And I put that back in the book. This stuff, like these things are 21 years old, and I found it on the street. I was like, oh, yes! And, oh, did I say fuck? So, I don't find any of my amends cards that I had made, my Aunt Joan who passed, and all these things that kind of meant a lot to me over the years. The only other thing I found was an amends card that I didn't want to make on a current list. I'm like, are you serious? Like, really? The only card I found is an amends that I would be happy to have forgotten about, and it blew away and I lost it. But no, that's the one that God put back in my path, and I realized it was a sign, and I called and I made and finished that amends from a recent inventory. But the funny part about this is not even that. Once I opened my big book and sat there like, oh my God, I lost my book. This is how it reads now. My big book's changed a little bit. And it says, now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Never avoid these responsibilities, but be sure you're doing the right thing if you assume them. Helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. A kindly act once in a while isn't enough. You have to act the Good Samaritan every day. So I now have an X-rated big book, so I got to be careful with sponsees, you crazy bastards. So anyway, I just figured I would share that with the crew. Yeah, and this is the point about laughter and recovery. It's a huge positive because I didn't have a whole lot to laugh about when I first came in. And when I tell my story, I try as best I can to do the Reader's Digest version of my story. A classic talk is what it was like, what happened, and what we're like now. And Bill went into a lot of that in the history. Oh, you know what? Reminded me, Bill, well, what a great job he did on the history of AA. And as I was sitting there, it's another story that I don't usually tell, but it struck me on how important that stuff can be. And Bill talked about, it really hit me, your history talk. And so I went, and this is about 4 years ago, I had called one of the guys that was like a spiritual guide or teacher from the early day, my sponsor's sponsor when I first came into the room, this guy Joe Red, who's like amazing. And I had called him and I said, look, I need to go back through the work again. Kind of, it's time. I'm very angry a lot, and that's not a good sign, and so I think I need to do a little house cleaning. So Joe, he lives in Ohio now, and so he said, listen, if you want to do it, we'll do it. And he said, I can do it remotely. You're taking some people through right now. He's like, what I'll do is you can take yourself through with them. I'll give you direction each time before you meet with them to open the book. But once you get up to your fourth step and you have to share 5, you need to fly out. That's the only way I'll agree to do this. You have to fly out to me in Ohio. You come for the weekend with Patty and I, and you spend the weekend, and you share a 5th step. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I did. And when I got up to my 4th step, it's a lot more than I thought. Anybody who hasn't done a house cleaning in a while, it's a little shocking what falls through the net. Anyway, I did it, and I went and I flew out there, and I shared a 5th step, and I had a great experience. And since I was out there in Ohio anyway, Joe had mentioned to me, and he's like, you should probably, it's only an hour out of your way, and you've got plenty of time. He's like, you should go see Dr. Bob's house. And I said, oh, yeah, that would be kind of cool. I like the AA. I don't know if I like it as much as Bill does, apparently, but I like it. It's interesting to me. And so I went. Now, I'm sober for a long time at that point, right? But it's weird when you go on, I'm alone, right? And so I'm in this rental car, and there's like cobblestones on the street out leading up to Dr. Bob's house. And when you drive down, the car is shaking. And I'm like, and I don't know why, but I got nervous. And I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why I got nervous, but I'm nervous, right? So I pull up in front of the house, and I see, and I'm like, that's it, I think so. And there's 12 steps, by the way, leading up to Dr. Bob's house, which is pretty interesting. And so I park the car, and I go in, and I go walk up the steps, and I don't know, it was like a weird feeling, like these guys, it's very meaningful what occurred early days. It's why I'm alive, right? So I walk up the steps of the thing, and I go to walk in, and I notice there's a crew of people in there, and they're all talking. It seems like there's some like formal thing happening in the house, and I had my hand on the screen door, and I took my hand off of it, and I was like, I don't think I should probably walk in here. And the lady giving the talk, who turned out to be Gail, who's the historian for AA, and she sees me, and she goes, come in, come in. And I was like, no. She was like, yeah, come in. And I said, okay. And I opened the door. Everyone in the room turned and looked at me. I'm like, And I go, and I step to the side, and I'm sitting there. And she is in the middle of giving a history about Dr. Bob and Smitty. And I didn't know he was called Smitty. And she was giving a history about the family. She told a really interesting story about Dr. Bob. And I don't think Bill mentioned it. And it's kind of, it's a little messed up. But I'm going to tell the story because, I don't know, I just feel like it. And so I didn't know this about Smitty. And so, I'm paraphrasing a little because my brain is broken. But this is pretty much what she said. So as it turns out, Smitty, back in the day, his daughter was, she fell in love with, or she had a crush on, the plumber's kid. And Dr. Bob, and she told us, Gail said this, and I'll tell everybody else this, remember, don't look badly upon Bill or Bob, especially Bob, because back in the day, in the 1930s, it was about your station in life. It was about, he was a doctor, and being a doctor held a certain, social standard to that. And they looked at it that way. They just did. You belonged to the country club and the whole thing. And, Keeping Up with the Joneses goes on now, but back then it was much more formal. And she had a crush on the plumber's kid, and he said absolutely not. And he put a kibosh on it, and she was pissed. But Dr. Bob didn't care. And the Devil May Care chap that you read about in the big book, I forget the guy's name, but the Devil May Care chap was one of his early sponsees. He gave the guy a couple of bucks and told him, take my daughter out on a date because she's all upset about the plumber's kid. I want you to take him out. So the guy's like, sure. And he was a little wise guy, early day drunk. And so he takes her out on a date, and they actually get along pretty well. And she falls in love with the guy, and they end up getting married, which is kind of cool. One of his early day sponsees, which is wild. Turns out the guy was an asshole. And he drank again. And he beat her. And he hit her. and he brutalized her, and she was very unhappy in her marriage, and she hated her father for that because she always wanted to be with the kid, and the dad, Dr. Bob, wouldn't allow her to get divorced because that was not acceptable back in the day, and she was in this unhappy, miserable marriage. And long story short, they ended up getting a divorce, which back in the day was brutal. And she hated her father for what he did. She hated Dr. Bob, our beloved Dr. Bob, can you imagine? And she never spoke to him again until the day of his death. She never spoke to him again because of the rift that occurred. And at the day of his funeral, she went to the funeral, and who showed up at the funeral but the plumber's kid? And they fell in love and got married that much later on in life, which I think is just an unbelievable, amazing, story. And it's an AA story. And that's one of the things that I'll say when I tell my story. My story is an AA story. And that means that there's some good stuff, but it's not all good stuff. And that means that sometimes life can kind of deal us curveballs in sobriety. And so I didn't even realize that this was what it was going to be, but I'm going to tell you guys this way of telling my story because of where this is all going for me right now. But so picture me at 10 years sobriety, and don't hold me to any dates. If any historians ever look back on my stories and talks, all my dates are wrong because I have no idea when it actually happened, but let's just spitball. Around 10 years sober, I'm about 10 years sober, and I had been through some rough stuff, and I was in a dark period in my sobriety. I had, a little bit before this, I had stopped going to meetings, and I had stopped slowly. I went from 4 a week to 2, 3 a week to 2 a week to 1 a week to going every other week. I stopped doing inventory in the evenings. It went the same way. And before you know it, I haven't written. I probably about 10 days since I've written, 3 months. You ever look at a notebook and be like, what? That's impossible. No, it's true. You haven't written. And slowly I stopped doing all the things you guys taught me to get well. And I became very, very sick, and I started having drink dreams and drug dreams. Any of the newcomers, drink dreams and drug dreams are not normal. When people say, oh, it's totally normal, you're in early recovery, it's not normal. That's the mind and the universe's way of saying, warning sign, you're not okay. If you're having dreams and romanticizing something that could kill you, that's negative. That's not a good thing. And it's probably something that needs to be addressed. And I knew that. My sponsor told me that early days that I started having the drink dreams and drug dreams. And I called the guy on Staten. And now I'd been away from AA for 10 months. It was the sickest part in my sobriety, and I started thinking about drinking and using. And it was the only time, that short period at the tail end of my doing absolutely nothing to stay sober, that I actually, because I never really, ever since early days, I never really thought about drinking and drugging, but I started having dreams. I didn't come up with a plan, I wasn't thinking about it, but I started having the dreams, and I know that's bad. So I called the guy on Staten Island, Tattoo Larry, and I said, listen, I'm in a bad way. And he had me come to him, and what did he do? He didn't take me through the steps. He took me to Top Tomato. He said, you want to do something to get back on track? Meet me every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and take me grocery shopping at the Top Tomato on Staten Island. I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah, we'll get sober in the aisles of Top Tomato. I was like, all right. And I did. I picked him up every morning at 7 a.m. at Top Tomato, and I went and he'd go get me that chicken, go get me that. And I'm 10 years sober, and I'm getting him his stuff for his cart. And in the aisles, we talked a lot. And he said, sometimes people like us, we get disconnected from the stuff that we do, and sometimes we can pick that tools back up again and start utilizing them in our life, and we can get back to well. Other times you may find the needed power is just not there, and you may not be able to just start writing inventory again. And if not, it's going to be a whole different ballgame, and we're going to need to start over right from step 1. And he said, you're going to need to go through the steps again anyway, but for now, do we get you in 9, 10, 11, and 12, or do we get you back to 1? Long story short, he gets me, and I start rocking and rolling, and I just reconnected with AA, and I got on fire again fast, back to meetings, sponsoring people. Why would we ever allow ourselves not to do this? Because the power is immense. But I did, and I got sick, and now I got well. And thank God I did, because I didn't know what was coming down the pike. And what came down the pike for me, you ever notice people like us, that one bad thing doesn't happen, 3 or 4 happen in a row in a short period of time? It's absolutely brutal sometimes. And I'll tell you what happened to me. Now I'm back and I'm on fire, but life decided that it was going to deal me out what I consider to be kind of a bad hand. And the girl that I was married to at the time, we were Mr. and Mrs. AA. Our house was Mr. and Mrs. AA's house. Open door policy. Any day I come home from work, there could be 5 people in my house. Newcomers, maybe my sponsees, maybe hers, who's eating dinner, who's writing inventory. And we just had an open door policy in our house. And she and I were, simpatico, and we did this thing together. And she fell away from it, and she decided that she didn't want to be sober anymore, and that she didn't want to come to AA anymore. And so she inevitably drank. not on a relapse. She planned it and said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think I'm a real alcoholic. And she started drinking. As that happened, we tried to work it out, and we have 2 kids, and now the kids are almost 2 years old, and she's drinking, and our marriage, which I always held very, very dear, completely fell apart, which is brutal. It's very difficult to deal with in sobriety. At that time, now we realize that we have to get a divorce, and as this all starts happening with the divorce, I'm like, I can't believe I'm getting divorced. I don't really believe in divorce. I'm getting divorced, and now the housing market crashed. And I had, being the genius that I am, I figured I could put my money into the equity in the house because I won't spend it, because I'm bad with money. I throw money away. And so I put it in equity in the house, like basically my life savings. But when you get divorced and you have to sell the house and the house market crashes, that's bad. It sucks, and I didn't know. And I realized what I was getting for the house, I was basically going to be left with nothing. And so once I do the math, I'm like, well, thank God that in 3 weeks I'm going to get a decent bonus from my job, and that'll carry me through and fix everything. And literally, I get called into the office, and my boss tells me, listen, unfortunately, there's been a downturn. There's going to be no bonuses this year. I'm like, what? Like, there's no way this is all happening right now. Literally, that day that I found out about the no bonus, and don't hold me to the times, it might have been a day later, I'm not sure, but it makes it more dramatic. That day, I get a call, and it was my son had been having some problems. He's only a year and 3/4 old, and he'd been having back problems. And little kids that age aren't really supposed to be having back problems. He was complaining of pain. I took him to every doctor under the sun. Finally, the last doctor said, you got to go see a disease specialist and they're saying, we're not saying he has this, but there's a possibility that your son has leukemia. Now, I can't tell you, that's a lot, even if you're in fit spiritual condition. To lose your life savings, your wife, your house, your kid may have leukemia, all that stuff hitting at the same time is absolutely brutal. I don't care where you are in your recovery. And I go out to get into my car, to go drive, to see this doctor, because they called and said, you need to come in and blah, blah, blah. I get in the car to go, I get into my truck, and I turn the key, and my car goes, and I lost it. I said, you motherfucker! And I start cursing God. And I get out of my truck, and when I say I flipped out in my garage, I mean I broke stuff. I freaked out. I'm like, are you kidding me? I just finally all came to a head. And I just absolutely, totally flipped out. And I'm in the middle of breaking stuff, and all of a sudden, a calm comes over me. From the top of my head to the tip of my toes. And I'm not saying it was a good calm. I don't know yet at this point. Just a calm. Sometimes calm before the storm. Who knows what's going to come as a result of it. And I went over and I sat down on the steps of my garage, put my head in my hands, and now I'm going to go back to 1996 when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. Because that's where I found myself after 11 years sitting on the stairs of my garage doing the work that we do. But it wasn't always like that. And for me, when I first came into AA, I know it freaks you out a little bit. Right now I'm going back to the beginning, but that's like a movie version of what I'm doing. I'm not one of these people who talks about in our recovery, and everyone has their own experience, and I don't discount whatever everybody's experience is, God bless. For me, I'm not one of these kids who had my first drink when I was 5 and, I fell in love with it right away and blah, blah, blah. I didn't like the taste of alcohol. I had no interest in alcohol. I did not start drinking at 5 or 8 or 10, 12 or even 13. At 15 years old in our neighborhood, 14, whatever it was, don't hold me to the dates, the kids in the neighborhood would get 40s of Miller Lite, and we would all go into the woods. But for me, I hated the taste, and so but I want to be one of the guys. I've always had that problem, actually, and I wanted to be one of the guys. I wanted to fit in, and so I'll go along to get along, and so I'd go into the woods, and I'd open the 40 and be like, yeah, this is awesome, and then when they weren't looking, I would pour it out behind the tree, you know what I mean? Because I didn't like the taste of it. I was tripping on mescaline at the time. I don't know if I mentioned that. It's not like I didn't want to get high. I just didn't want to drink because I hated the taste, but I was wasted on other stuff, but whatever. Alcohol didn't really come into my life until I was like 16 and a half, like maybe a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was later. That's when I actually started drinking, and alcohol became a true love of mine. That relationship lasted for quite some time, and I am a hider. I don't know if anybody else does that or has ever done that. I hide stuff. That's just how I do it. And I literally plan my drinking and I hide my alcohol. I had a bottle of Jack Daniels behind my sweaters in my closet that I would, bang out every night. I start getting drunk, if anybody identifies with this, most normal people don't start drinking before they go out with their friends. They wait till they actually get to the bar to order a drink. Not me. As I'm putting my ponytail, what are you laughing about? I was cool as shit back in the day. I had long ponytail, I look good. And I'd start doing shots before I even went out. And when you have no money and you're somebody like me and you start drinking, I'm the guy who would watch everybody in the bar, and if you went into the bathroom with a half a drink and came out with nothing in your hand, you forgot it, but not me. And I'd go in there and I'd hit that up. I'd take it for my own. That's just how I know it's kind of gross, but I didn't even think twice. And I would hide alcohol all over my house. I would hide it at Thanksgiving. I always tell people, because it occurred to me when I was getting sober, the stuff we look back at we did. Like my mom would keep the turkey carcass. This is just Thanksgiving, so it's interesting. She would keep the turkey carcass in the refrigerator because we would make turkey soup the next day. So she'd keep the carcass, and I would take a couple of Meisterbrow and shove it up inside the turkey so my crazy alcoholic family wouldn't drink all the beer at the end, 2 o'clock in the morning when everyone goes home. I want to know I got at least a couple left. And that's me. I was always planning. I was always hiding. And one of the stories I tell in the Laughter and Recovery, and this is kind of insane, and only you people will really understand this, but it does talk about the nature of the sickness of the mind of an alcoholic and where my mind was. This is before I even really truly crossed the line. But the fast version of the story is my old man came home and had 2 bottles of Absolute vodka. And Absolute back in the day, for anybody old like me or older, knows that Absolute at one time was the top, the cream of the crop name, better than Georgie, right? And now Absolute's like nothing. It's low shelf vodka. Back then it was high shelf vodka. My father brought it home, and he put it under the sink because my father would never touch the good stuff. He drank Georgie his whole life, and so he would never drink it. But it was there for any of us to drink if we wanted it in the house. In my house at 16, 17 really, you could drink alcohol in the house as long as you weren't doing drugs. You were okay, right? Just as long as you're not doing drugs, you're fine. And so the vodka was there for us to have, and he put it where we keep the Canadian Mist and the Zambuca and all the untouched stuff that you only drink once in a while. And so they went away not long after that on a vacation, my family. And I knew the vodka was there, and I was the only one that stayed home, and I was like, I'm staying home. And so that Friday night, I decided it would be fun to, have a little party with the vodka. And I'm allowed to, and I went and I opened it up, and I started drinking the Absolute, and you know how we do it. I drank it, the whole bottle of Absolute in the course of the Friday evening until early Saturday morning. The next afternoon when I woke up, I was, I go, did somebody laugh because I said afternoon? I don't know, maybe somebody was coughing. There's little things I notice in the big book, like, early Tuesday morning, and you're like, oh, what happened on Monday? I noticed that stuff. And so I go into the kitchen and I go clean up my mess from the night before, and I see the empty bottle of vodka, and the normal thing would be to cap it and throw the thing away. But I'm not normal, and I already was hiding my drinking. And I didn't want them to know, even though I was allowed to, that I drank it. So I went to the sink and I filled it up with water, right to the level. Does anybody know the level of medications, of alcohol? I know the level of everything. I even know where the label was. I make like a mental picture of the label so I know I can put it back right. And I put it back under the sink, and that Saturday night I decided that the only other bottle in there should go, and I drank that too. And then I did the same thing, and the same exercise, I filled it up. No one's ever even really going to probably drink it, so it'll be there. And by the time they find out, who knows, I'll probably be dead or moved out. Literally a few days after they got back, my dad, I guess he didn't have any Georgia, and I still can't believe that he went to drink this because he would never drink Absolute. I'm sitting on the couch in my living room, and I'm watching TV, and did anybody have the auditory stuff? Like a lot of times us drinkers and people like us, I know what drawer you're opening in your room. Like if I stole money out of your sock drawer, I know the sound of that versus your underwear drawer. I just know from in the house, doot, 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 and I know where you're at. And that particular cabinet had a particular creak to it, and I hear it, and I'm like, and I lower the volume on the TV, I'm like, what the? And now I hear clunk, and I hear the ice, and I'm like, what the? I said, he's not drinking that. Sure enough, my dad decided to have a vodka and orange juice, and now I have a decision to make. Do I leave or do I ride it out? I've got 4 brothers and sisters. It's not like it's a foregone conclusion that I did it. So I'm sitting on the couch, and I decide to ride it out. I'm just more like a deer in the headlights because my father's a frightening man, and I hear it, glug, 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 glug. I hear him put it back. I hear the thing, and then I hear him go, what the fuck? And I'm like, oh my God, it's too late to run. And I hear him open the thing, I hear it unscrew, I hear him open the second one and unscrew it. He beelines it to the living room and goes, what's the matter with you? Why would you do that? He's like, you could drink this, why would you put water? He knew it was me. He didn't even think my brothers and sisters, he knew who it was. But there's a thing in there for us, a truth, a first step truth, and the truth was, I don't know why I did that. I did it because I had already had the signs of the mind of an alcoholic. I already was hiding my amounts. I didn't want people to know what I was drinking, even though I was allowed to do it. And those are the telltale signs, and that's the stuff that started occurring for me, the hiding, the lying, the stealing, the cheating. Somewhere along the way, other non-AA conference-approved dry goods were introduced into my picture, and what a combo! That stuff will enable you to drink a lot longer and a lot more. I mean, it's legendary stuff, and I thought I'd struck gold, and so I did, and man, that gold brought me. And so this is the part where I go, this is my version of a Reader's Digest version of my story, but I'm going to just say that I could tell you 500 stories about times I've fallen into Christmas trees, passed out in the snow on mountain, gone to the woods with my friends in cabins where I literally passed out on the snow in 10-degree weather, and because I went out to pee, and had someone else not come to pee and found me, I probably would have been dead of hypothermia. That happened to me more than once. I was found in I was just a brutal drunk, and I stole from everyone. I stole from everyone. There was nothing. I can't tell you. I did everything embarrassing, humiliating, degrading thing to myself in the course of my drinking and using that you can possibly imagine. If it's got a name, fifth step considerations, if it's got a name, it's been done. Much of it has been done by me. And so that's just my truth. But in the end of my story, fast forward, you can imagine all the crazy, my poor parents and my mom, what I put that poor woman through and what she witnessed and what the forms of PTSD that our loved ones get dealing with people like us, God only knows. But in the end, my story, I ended up finally, my brother was the last person in my family that allowed me to live with him. And my brother finally said, look, you got to go. He's like, I can't live like this anymore. The poor guy had padlocks on both sides of his door because I would jimmy it open when he was out at sea. And this is brutal. And he worked on the tugboats, and he was away for weeks at a time on the sea. And so I had the place completely to myself. And so this is a typical day in the life of me. We identify, we don't compare. Alcoholism does different things to different people. It takes you to different places. Maybe you've only gone down here, maybe you've gone down here, maybe you've gone all the way in a place that I'd never been. But for me, this is what it did to me. This was my life. This is a typical life in the day of Richie for about a year and a half. This is how I lived. My brother was never there. And I would come home, and I would go out, and I would beg, borrow, steal, sometimes work. I'd get as much money together as I could get together doing whatever it is that I did, usually stealing, but whatever it is that I could do, and I'd get as much money as I could, and I would go out and buy. My days of Jack Daniels and Bacardi were way over. Now I'm buying the cheapest stuff you can get and the biggest bottle you can get at the liquor store. I would go see the, Marky Bumps, my Flacco dealer on the corner, and I would go and I would see him for the non-AA approved stuff, and I would even go buy the sedatives that Bill and company used, and I'd keep those. I'd always buy 4, and I'd keep those on a top shelf because I know 2 days after my party ends, I'm going to need that to pass out. That was just I planned all of my drinking, all of my episodes were all well planned and well prepared for. And I would come home, and the way any of you would come home, and you could just picture when you're out shopping, right? And you go to the shop, right? And you come home and you put away the bread, put away the milk, you check out your mail, and you're doing all the normal things that people do. My normal day was that I would walk home, and I would have a paper bag as well, and I would go right into the back bedroom. I was in a little closet of a bedroom that my brother allowed me to stay in his 2-bedroom apartment. It's like a bedroom and a closet. And I would go in the back, and I would put whatever the booze that I got was. I would get a bunch of ice and put it in a bucket and bring it into the back. I'd get a bunch of empty Coca-Cola bottles and that my brother used and put those in the bedroom because I ain't ever going to the bathroom out of that room once I lock myself in. So you got to pee in soda bottles for 2 days. It's brutal. And I would have my Ann Page cola. Anybody from Staten Island, if you know what Ann Page is, it's very cheap cola. And so I would get all that stuff and I'd line it all up in the bathroom. I would get whatever AA, the dry goods, and I would have that all in a place. Now I'm not even drunk yet, nothing. I'm just preparing. I'm just getting ready for and so I'm just preparing. Is that like a warning, like that I'm almost done? Probably no. So I'm just prepping. I'm prepping myself. And now I go into the closet and I get out my booby trap box. I had a booby trap box and it was perfectly manned for me to be able to booby trap the entire apartment. When I say booby trap box, I mean it had exactly the amount of beer bottles you'd need to put on the door, so if anybody turned the thing, it would fall, I would hear you, and I would know you were there. I had towels perfectly rolled up that I would put on the bottom of each door so no one could look in and see me under. I had sheets that perfectly fit every window in my entire home. And I now, I'm not even drunk or anything, I'm just preparing for what's gonna come, and I'd go booby trap in my house. And man, I was a booby trap expert towards the end. And I literally booby trapped mops, brooms, leaned up against doors. And I always say, we even had like the bathroom in the apartment was in the middle of the apartment. There weren't even any windows. I booby trapped door too, you never know. 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm gonna swear someone's in there, so I'm booby trapping it. And so I just booby trapped the whole place, and then I would put go into the bedroom, I'd put a chair up against the door, a towel on that door. In the beginning, it took me like 3 hours to end up naked with no TV on and just sitting rocking back and forth. Now, in the end, you just give up on the 3 hours. I'm just like, I know what this is going to end up, and that's how you drink, naked. Like that's where my mind was. And I would stay in that room for 2, sometimes 3 days in a row, depending on how much stuff that I could got. And in the end, there wasn't even any TV or radio because I had to listen. And I sat there alone for days. That's my fun. That's where alcohol took me. That was my fun. That was my party. And that became my alcoholic life seemed the only normal one. That was my alcoholic life. And I didn't even think twice. I knew I had a problem. I just accepted it. And that's a big difference, right? Like I wasn't one of these people who didn't realize or like, no, I can handle it. I knew I couldn't handle it. I knew my life was off the rails, but I was okay with it. I was resigned to the fact that this is my lot in life and I'm just going to do it as best I can as long as I can. And that's what I accepted. Until my brother threw me out. Things change. I don't know if you know this, but if you lose your house and you have no car or job or money and you have nowhere to go, you're homeless. I don't do homeless. You know what I mean? My story doesn't go under a bridge because I need somebody to do my laundry. And I don't, you know what I mean? I don't do homeless well. And so thank God, you know, my brother didn't go to any tough love Al-Anon classes. He just was sick of me and threw me out. And there I was, and I went to my family and said, I think I have a problem with alcohol and drugs. And they were like, you think you do? And so they arranged for me to go away to detox. This is where my story really begins, right? Coming out of a detox. We have choices to make. Some newcomer in here will probably have that choice today at some point. It happens to us in all areas, wherever we are. I was on the front stairs of the detox after 7 days of absolute misery, but 7 days, I hadn't gone 11 years without at least doing something, whether it be a joint, something I would do every day for 11 years since I was a kid. Not a day went by that I didn't do something, whether it be drinking, smoking, something. Now I went 7 days in a row. Newcomers, if I ask you, how much time you have, don't ever dare say to me, I only had 52 days. Because 52 days in a row is legendary stuff. 52 days in a row? Like I couldn't even conceive of 52 days in a row of any kind of sobriety. Now here I am with 7 days and I'm out in front steps of the detox and I've got a choice. They told me, don't think. When you get out of here, go right to an AA meeting. Go directly to AA. And I was like, yeah, I will. And I go stand on the front stairs and I'm like, you know what? And I remember that day on Bailey Seton Hospital. And I remember standing there thinking, do I go to this meeting that's right here, or I wonder who's out? I wonder who's around if I called Marky Bums. Not to do anything, just to see who's around and maybe I'll go hang out for a little while. You know, some people have that devil and angel conversation outside of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, outside of a day of sobriety. You'll literally be outside after hearing speakers and blah, 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 but your mind is still battling and you'll be like, well, everything they said was cool, but I wonder. And that's the thing. And for me, the devil and angel, my angel was very, very small. And so I said, well, you'll lose that battle. I gotta go. And I went right to an AA meeting, right? I run to an AA meeting and I go into this meeting and it's in the middle of the day. And if you ever go to AA meetings in the middle of the day, it's usually a lot of old people, like 45, right? I'm 46 now. But when you're in your 20s and you come in, people like me are old. And screw you if you think I'm old. But I thought they were old, and I go in and this meeting's deep, 40 people, right? This is my first experience, right? Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll throw it out there to all of us, is not a hotbed of mental health, right? Let's be honest. There's a lot of, we're an interesting lot, right, that get cobbled together. So I go to my first ever meeting, and there's 40 deep, and I go in and I do what they told me to do. I said, I'm Richie, I'm alcoholic, I just got out of Bailey Seton Detox, and they told me to raise my hand and tell you that. And I looked at my feet the rest of the meeting. It goes around the room, and every one of you people decided, I guess there was no cross-talking rules at this particular meeting, and every single person decided they were going to talk about me during their share. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous is funny, and I heard a speaker say this, that a lot of times our experience is a looking back thing. We don't even realize what's going on until later when you look back on what happened. And I'd love to be able to tell the story, and I say this all the time, that I had it was really cool because everyone talked to me and I heard them, and no. It was annoying as possibly could be. And everybody who shared after the third person, I'm like, all right, let's move along, different topic. And I'm just staring at my feet, annoyed as possibly can be. No cross-talking rules. Everyone, all people, the rest of the meeting. And after a while, I was just like, whatever. After the meeting was over, they lined up like I was the speaker to talk to me. And everybody who came up to me, especially the guys on Staten Island, were like, hey, welcome to, and I'm like, everybody who touched me. I was just like, I didn't have a good experience after, like, wow, the story doesn't end that way. It doesn't end like, oh, they really took me in. I couldn't stand you people. And everyone who touched me, I had those issues of personal space, and I was like, I just couldn't wait to leave, yeah? So they give me, I don't know if you guys still do this out here in PA, but in Staten Island, we would have a meeting list for newcomers, and every guy in the room, we'd pass it around, we'd put our name and number for you to call, and they gave me this really cool list with like 30 phone numbers or 20 phone numbers on it that I would never call in a million years, and I said, oh, thanks for this useful list that I'm never going to call. And so now most people are gone and left the meeting, and I just can't, I just wanted to get out of there, but they kind of had me, and I couldn't just leave. I didn't want to be rude, I guess. And one of the guys, I saw him there waiting, and he was like pacing, waiting for people to file out. And he comes up to me, and his name is Jimmy, and he goes, hey, kid, listen to me. You see a little list of phone numbers? And I said, yeah, I got it. And he goes, well, that's me right there. You see the asterisk? That's me, Jimmy. And I said, all right, thanks, Jimmy. Again, I'm just like, I can't wait to get out of there. And he's like, nah, you don't understand. You call that number. And I said, yeah, all right, I'll call that number, Jimmy. And mental note, never call Jimmy for anything, right? It's Staten Island crazy, right? And I'm like, okay, Jimmy, yeah, thanks a lot. And he goes, nah, you don't understand, kid. He says, listen to me. 2 hours from now, 2 days from now, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, you're going to wake up at bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're going to be dying for a drink. And when you do, you call that number. It's my first meeting of AA. Like, really? So I'm like, my sobriety has been, wait till you hear some of the other, like the things that happen, it's like a movie, it's crazy. And that's a day that I remember, it's gone down in infamy, burned itself in my brain what this guy did. And so he's like, you call that number. And I said, all right, Jimmy, thank you. And he goes, let me tell you something else, kid. If it is 2 o'clock in the morning and my wife fancies you, tell that bitch to wake me up. My first meeting of AA out of a detox. Seriously? I never called Jimmy, ever, all right? I'll just tell you that. But this is what I mean about the looking back thing. This is what I mean about the looking back thing. I didn't realize what I found that day. What I found that day, and the thing about Crazy Jimmy was, he meant every word he said. Jimmy would have woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning, came and picked me up from wherever I was on Staten Island. He would have driven me to a diner and he would have sat and talked to me for 5 hours until the urge passed. Where do you find that other than this place? That's the power of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I walked into it and I didn't even realize what I had. That is rock star shit. And you can't find that anywhere. You can't pay for that. Jimmy meant every word he said. That's the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Screw division, man. The big book people and the meeting makers people and all that. We went through all that on Staten Island. There is no division. It's only in your own mind. There is no meeting makers and big book people. I am a meeting makers maker person, man. Meeting makers make it. That's cool. I'm not going to argue with you about that. That's your little slogan. I don't mind don't drink and go to meetings. Hell, I don't drink and go to meetings all the time. It's a third of what I need to do to stay sober. But if you say just don't drink and go to meetings, I'm going to attack you verbally in the meeting. You know what I mean? Because you got to do more than that, man. It ain't just drink and go to meetings. It's a lot more involved than just drink and go to meetings. But anyway, I found that day fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous for real. The rest of my story, the second meeting that I went to is where I got sober. The second meeting, I met my Abby Thatcher. And I was lucky, man, because I'm an eye-rolling, skeptical, wise-ass, nasty. I was angry early days. I had rage problems when I was out there, and that's not good. And it came from my dad. Thank you so much, Pop, for that wonderful gift. And I was very closed-minded. My family, you don't talk about your feelings. You don't, that all that stuff. I tell the stories all the time. If my father ever hears one of these tapes, he's going to be so pissed that I outed him. But, it's just what it was when we grow up. In my house, if something happened and I was like, Daddy, he'd be like, keep crying, Mary. That kind of stuff. That's how I grew up. And we laugh about that now, but that's some, it's catastrophic stuff when you're a little boy, right? Like, I realize now that I've kind of gotten in touch with me, what kind of effect that can have on a kid. Again, thanks, Pop. I've since told my father all the bad things he did to me when I was a kid. No, I'm only kidding. I didn't do that. So I lost myself. Right, so I met with my sponsor. And the first time I met my sponsor, I saw my own personal Ebby Thatcher, and he was a wild, insane drunk from my neighborhood. I don't know if anybody else would have gotten through to me. I have no idea. God puts people in your path when they're supposed to, your sponsor. Whatever that's supposed to look like, I don't know how it works or why, but that's the lunatic that was put in my path. And I saw him, and when I walked into the meeting and I saw Joey T-Bird, I was like, oh, this is going to be funny. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but this lunatic is going to probably hit someone or light something on fire. He was literally a brutal animal from my neighborhood, and I saw him, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And I go up to him like, hey, what's up, Joe? And I'm just waiting for him to be like, what's up, And he goes, hey, Richie, how's it going, man? I'm like, what? Like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, hey, how you doing? And there was something about his eyes. He was on fire. And I had no idea what was going on. And I was literally taken back. And I was like, it's good to see you, bro. What happened to you? What's going on? And he's like, man, why don't you sit and chill? And he's like, talk to me after the meeting. And he gave me a meeting list after the meeting was over. And he circled his home group called the Common Solution Group on Staten Island. And he said, Richie, honestly, he's like, you wouldn't even believe what's happened to me. He's like, come to this meeting. He's like, if you want it here. And he gave me a little tiny pocket version of the big book. And he said, everything about you. He's like, and we knew each other. He's like, I know you. Everything about you is in this book. They basically wrote it about and for you. He's like, you should check it out, read what you want, but come to my home group meeting and we'll talk more about it. I still have that book. And I went. Thank God I went to that meeting because my sponsor started me on a journey like you read about. And this is my point about when we come to share with you guys our experience, strength, and hope. My experience, strength, and hope comes from the experiences that I've had since I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I love to do this, by the way. If I was given the task of saying, take people through your first 12 steps, I love that. I could talk about any step for 2 hours, right? As a matter of fact, we might want to just keep me up here for the day. You guys can go home, because I'm good to go, right? But I love talking about all my step experiences, but you can't do that when you're here, you know what I mean? You're delivering So I'm just going to tell you guys some of the stuff that actually happened to me since I came into real recovery and I went on this path with my sponsor. And my sponsor got me, and he got me a real first step. And a real first step means, if you ever hear me introduce myself, I say, my name is Richie, I'm definitely an alcoholic. That's what I always say. People say, oh, do you want to be unique? You want to be different? I'm like, well, I am unique and different, but no, that's not why I do it. I do it because a lot of times newcomers will come and say, why do you say you're definitely an alcoholic? I say, that's a good question. Let's go sit down and talk about that. Because I had a first step experience, a real first step experience, which means that I know my truth, my personal truth. Not because you think I'm alcoholic or addict. I know I'm alcoholic, beyond any shadow of a doubt. I understand my physical problem, my mental problem, and my spiritual problem. And I understand that problem is never going to go away. There is no cure for alcoholism or addiction. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. That's words in a book, but it's real. Those words in a book actually translate into real life. And what does that mean look like to me? And so my sponsor set me about that, and he got me in touch with and understanding what my first step truth was. Then he started talking to me about God. Oh, man. Woo, I'm a recovering Catholic, baby. I was an altar boy for 5 years. There's not anything he could tell me about God and religion that I didn't already know, because I'm so smart. I mean, look how well I'm doing in my life. And so I got into conversations with my sponsor about that, and my honest truth was, wasn't really very open to the God thing. God is something that's probably real and we'll deal with after we die. But you see, my problems happen here in the real world. And that's what I would tell my sponsor. On planet Earth, we need real solutions. God's not going to magic beans are going to help me get well. And that's how I approached my conversations early day. And thank God for good sponsorship. And thank God he didn't say, you're a dick and leave my house. Instead, he just literally patted me on the head and said, you're going to be okay. And they wrote the program for people like me. They wrote it for everybody, but people like me particularly, they know that I'm going to be closed-minded and skeptical and doubtful, and that's not a stopper. It doesn't make a difference. You could be a complete atheist and still have an experience with Alcoholics Anonymous. And so he guided me through a 12-step recovery process. My 4th step was brutal. Like I said, I had anger and rage issues. I can show you. I should have brought it with me. I keep saying I'm going to do that one time to show you the nature of my rage. But I wrote my 4th step in a 5-subject notebook, 2 black marble notebooks, 3 memo pads. You know, I'm out of it, and I had all these different things. One of the memo pads, I remember one day writing my 4th step, I went into my drawer and took out one of my buck knives. And I stabbed my 4th step. I know this is brutal. And I ripped it right down the memo pad. I ripped it right down, threw it across the room, and stormed out of my house in rage, writing my 4th step. That's serious stuff, man. 4th step can be brutal. Thank God I only stabbed the notebook because, you know what I mean? I may be doing this talk from prison. But anyway, so my sponsor sent me on this path, and so I started doing this and started taking the actions. People in AA like to talk about don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. You guys have probably heard that before. And I agree, don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Here's the problem. When is this magic miracle? How do you get it and where does it come from, right? I want the miracle. You know, I want a miracle in my life. Where do you get the miracle? Unfortunately, it's different for everybody. And I don't know where people's miracles are going to happen, but I know when mine happened. And I love to share that story because it was a defining moment in my recovery. And so this is what happened. Now, I come in with my sponsor. He gets me up to the 12th step. I start sponsoring guys. Like, I was on fire, man. I was sponsoring 8 guys. Of course, you know, I'm an addict. So I take a good spiritual thing, and I make that sick as well. I take on more people than I could possibly handle, shirking my responsibilities with family and friends and work, because I'm going to get everyone sober, and it's just brutal. So I start sponsoring a bunch of these people, and I'm on fire. I'm having a great run. And my original sponsor that took me through the steps relapsed. That can shake you to the core. Anybody who's had a sponsor that relapsed early days, that can shake you to the core. And I went to his sponsor, and you know how I knew he was going to relapse? I went to his house. Growing up on Staten Island's great. It didn't even shock me. But I walked into the kid's house, and I go into his living room, and I went with my big book, and I hadn't heard from him in 2 weeks, which is weird. And I just show up at his house, and I'm like, what's going on? I look in his living room, and there's 40 phones. Him and his dad they did a bookmaking operation in his living room. And I'm like, Joe, I don't think you could do bookmaking in AA, right? I think that's bad, right? And he goes, listen to me, Richie. He said, in the real world, I got to pay my rent. And he told me there was no difference between the real world and the spiritual world. He told me the spiritual world's a filter to the real world. All of a sudden, there's separation for him. There's real world and there's spiritual world. I'm like, wait a minute. And he goes, listen, just don't lecture to me. I'm your sponsor. I'm like, okay, thank you. And I knew I was done. You know, there was no way. 3 weeks later, he was gone. I didn't hear from him again for 10 years. The guy went on a rip-roaring rage. This is a side thing, but there's a moral in this story as well for any sponsors out there. Be nice to your sponsees, because one day they may be your sponsor. And that was my experience. 10 years later, he came and looked me up, bereft and lost with everything in life. And he wandered back into my life, and we went through the steps together, and he's sober for 8 years today, man. God is good. So, anyway, I go off on side stories. I don't even know where the hell I am. Where am I right now? What the hell was I talking about? I'm not even joking. I'm totally lost. The miracle. My miracle. How can I forget that? So anyway, so I'm a year and a half into recovery, and I'm sponsoring all these people, but does anybody ever have this? Please tell me I'm not alone. But a year and a half in, and I'm on fire. God is good, and all of a sudden I'm connected with universal power. I can't believe I even believe that's real, and it actually is, because things started happening. I was like, that's a coincidence. That's weird. After 18 coincidences, you start to realize the word coincidence no longer applies in my life. And so I'm having these cool experiences, but then I don't know what happened. One day I woke up and my prayer life felt somehow, I'm sure it didn't just happen overnight, but it just felt empty a little. Prayer became real for me, and all of a sudden it felt I don't know, not tangible like it had been for a while. And my 10-step inventories where I'd be I got to do my inventory. All of a sudden I'm I'll do it tomorrow. And all of a sudden I started losing, not total interest, but and I started kind of drifting a little bit after a year and a half. And I went to my new sponsor, who was my sponsor, Joe. And I went to Joe. There were 2 Joes in my life. And I went to Joe Red. And I said, hey, listen, man, I said, I'm just feeling disconnected, you know what I mean? And I want to get with you because I want to get back on track. And he was like, all right, well, come to my house, bring your big book, bring all your AA stuff with you and come to my house. So, okay. So I went and I showed up at his house, and let me preface the rest of the story by telling you that I know what's good for me, because I can manage my own life really well. I've proved that over the years. This is one of the traps we fall into. Before I know it, I'm managing my own life again, and I'm making the decisions because I know what's good for me. And I show up at Joe Red's house. I'll never forget the day. And I go to him, and he sits down. He goes, so tell me what's going on. I told him everything I just told you, prayer and inventory. And he was like, okay. And I said, but listen, Joe, this is what we're going to need to do. I need accountability. I need to get back on track. And I proceed to tell him what he and I need me to do to get on track, right? Because I'm basically sponsoring myself through him, I guess. And so I went through my stuff. I'm like, I need to start doing my 10 steps during the day. I got to write my inventory in the evenings. I got to start sponsoring guys. I need to double up my meetings. I got to make my prayer life. I got to even fake it till you make it. I got to just pray even if I'm not connected with it, and it's all going to come together as a package. And I go through this whole diatribe with him, and I said, and I think that should do it. And he goes, wow, what do you even need me here for? And I'm like, well, I mean, and I know that covers it, right? And he goes, you know what's interesting, Richie? One of the things you didn't mention, I didn't hear you talk anything about your amends. And I said, oh, well, that's not, no, well, I had finished almost all my amends. Like, I blazed a trail. The only things, and I told him this, the only ones I have left are the bullshit amends. And he literally looked at me and he said, what's a bullshit amends? And I said, the unimportant ones, the nonsense that just came when I did the prayer. It wasn't associated with my fourth step, and, God showed me something I did bad. I'm like, it's all total nonsense. And he's like, well, humor me. Pull out your bullshit amends, and let's go over those and see what that looks like. Maybe it could be in there. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got them. And I pull them out. I'm like, oh, this is the one, Joe. And I was being my typical sarcastic self, and I owed $12 to Save On, which had since closed down and became CVS or something. And I was like, oh, $12 at the time I shoplifted that umbrella. I'm like, oh, that's the one. And then I found one of the amends cards, and I went through this whole thing with him, and I found one of the amends cards, and I was like, this is the one, Joe. This is going to set me into sobriety. When I was a little kid on Staten Island, I was a paper boy, and I delivered the Staten Island Advents. And I don't know if there's paper boys anymore. Now everybody gets the digital news, but back then you'd go give papers to everyone, and you'd go collecting and knock on their door, and I had a little book, and I would get the money, and it was really cool, learn a lot of responsibility. Anyway, it really worked well for me. And so, but even early days, I don't have a problem. As a kid, I was a natural born thief and liar. And I went to the nicest family on my route, and I double collected from them, and I lied to them. And I went up to the husband one week, and I saw him out doing leaves or whatever, and I said, hey, Mr. D, I'm collecting for 2 weeks. It's like, 2 weeks? I'm like, yeah, well, I missed 3 weeks, and you guys, I didn't realize you. He was like, all right, Richard, no problem. And he went in the house and got me the extra $2.25 and gave it to me. Literally, because I'm a rocket scientist, I see the wife like the next week, and I collected from her, because I'm sure they'll never talk, and I collected for her. I gave her I figured if it worked on him, it'll work on her. And I said, collecting for 2 weeks. And she was like, 2 weeks? And I was like, yeah. I said, I'm going to be going on vacation, and I spun some nonsense lie. And she was like, okay, Richard, no problem. And I knew it would work, right? Fools. And so she went in and got extra $2.25 and gave me that, $4.50. And I have an amends card. I don't know where that came from. When I was doing my 8-step list, it just came into my mind. I remembered lying to them and taking this $4.50. So and Joe Red was like, okay, so, and I made fun of it, and I was like, oh, this is the one. And Joe's like, Richie, you need to make that amends. And I'm like, Joe, seriously? I said, I'll make it. I don't care. And he was like, well, you don't care. Why haven't you done it? I'm like, whatever. And he's like, you need to go make that amends. I said, Joe, I'll make the amends. First of all, it was 18 years ago. Then the people aren't even going to live there. Like, there's no way they're even going to live in the house. They wouldn't know who I am. And I start going through, all of a sudden I find myself going through reasons why I don't need to make or shouldn't have to make this amends. So Joe says, Richie, stop right there. He's like, you're giving me all this nonsense. He said, it doesn't matter if they live there. It doesn't matter if there's anybody there to hand the money to. He said, the only thing that matters, and people who've been around have heard this before, and I love it, it's one of my favorite things, the only thing that matters for you in your sobriety is the sound of willingness. And I didn't know what he was talking about because I hadn't heard that at that point. And I said, what is the sound of willingness? And he said, the sound of willingness is this. And that's you knocking on every door and fixing and repairing the damage you've done in the past. And that's willingness. You can say you're willing all you want. Willingness matters when you go knock on the door. And so I was like, fine, I'll go give them their $4.50. And he said, $20. They make my sponsorship family, they always made you give interest. $20 in an envelope. 18 years you said it was, $20. So I put the 20 bucks in an envelope and I go, and I literally go, I leave his house and he's like, if you want to work with me and you're serious and you're still willing to go to any lengths that you said you were, you have 11 unfinished, apparently bullshit amends. I want them all done by next Wednesday. So I go up to these people's house and I'm kind of like, whatever. And as I start getting closer, it's weird, when you put down amends for a little while, I started getting fearful. I was nervous. I'm like, oh my God. So my sound of willingness wasn't that. My sound of willingness, as it turned out, was, you know what I mean? Because I had a plan. Like, I'm going to light knock the door. When she doesn't answer, in the mailbox, thank you, Universal Amends, and off I go. That was my plan. And I go and I light knocked it, and I swear she was waiting for me on the other side. The door immediately opened up, and I see this woman, she has silver hair now, because it's many years later, but oh my God, it was her. And I know it's her. Little Irish Spitfire lady, and I'm like, oh my God, it's her. She looks up at me, and she's like, oh my God, it's Richie Hessian, the paper boy. And I'm like, no. Like, everything I told him, she was there, she recognized me, and so I'm like, oh my God. I was like, oh, hey, Mrs. D, how are you? She's like, come in. I'm like, no, thank you. I'm not going in the house. So I take the envelope out, and I figure, let me hit her up with it and get out of here. And she's like, nonsense, and she comes out and hooks my arm and brings me into her home, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a neighborhood, you know? She pulls me in, and there's Mr. D, and he's laying on the couch, and he's watching a basketball game, I think, a Knicks game. And I see him, and he, one of those things where I just interrupted his afternoon, and he was like, oh, hey, Richard. And he stands up, and he's a mountainous Irishman. These are the things I remember in my amends. If you ever met a mountainous Irishman, they're an Irishman. He was a 7-foot-tall basketball hand Irishman. A huge mountain of a man. I felt like a little paper boy again. I'm like, hey, Mr. And he shakes my hand, and all of a sudden it occurs to me that the two people that I stole from when I was a little boy are standing in front of me in their living room. And I'm like, oh my God. And Mrs. Dunn goes, Tommy, Jenny! And I'm like, no, Miss Dunn. She calls her kids, and I'm like, no. Tommy comes in from the kitchen with a pot and pan in his hand. He's like, hey, Richie. Down the stairs, on the banister, leading down the stairs, comes Jimmy. And Jimmy's a neighborhood kid, and he's got this long beard now. And I know him. And he's like a stoner from my neighborhood, and he's got a long beard. And he comes halfway down the stairs, and he's like, what's up? And I say, hey, what's up, Jim? And he goes, what's going on, man? I said, oh, not good to see you, Jimmy. So Mrs. Dunn looks at me, and the whole family's staring at me. She goes, so what are you doing here? Oh, my God. I still, get crawly when I think about I was in that position, right? And so I didn't know what to do or what to say, and so I went into AA mode that you guys taught me, and I said, and I looked at my shoes, interestingly enough. I don't look people in my shoes anymore. I hadn't, ever since I got really sober, early days. I look people in the eyes when I speak to them now. I never used to. I look past you or at my feet. I looked down at my feet, and I said, you may or may not know this, but I'm in a 12-step recovery program, Victory Over Alcoholism. One of the things we do is make a list of people we've harmed. Your name came up on the list, and I lied to you guys both, $2.25 each, and I overcollected, and I'm really sorry. And I handed her the envelope. That fast! And I just went autopilot. I was scared shitless, and I just handed her the envelope. And Mrs. Dunn comes up to me, and she takes my chin, and she lifts up my chin for me to look her in the eyes. And she says, we knew that you lied to us back when you were a little boy all those years ago. And she said, but we just figured maybe you guys were having a hard time and your family needed the money. I can't explain it. Every time I tell the story, I get jerked up because I can't explain it. I wasn't even going to make that amends because I think I know what's good for me. Something clicked inside of me that day. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you. But they were willing to let me steal from them and theirs because they thought me and mine were having problems. And there were really people like that out there in the world. And they let me steal from them. And something changed in me. I don't know why, I couldn't tell you. But something changed in me. There was a click. And I felt God. I don't know any other way to put it. I felt a connection with the universe that I never felt before in my life. She came over and gave me a hug. Mr. Dunn, the mountainous Irishman, the stoner, came down the stairs. The whole family was hugging on me in the living room, dude. Oh my God. Like, how do you do that, right? It lit me up, man. It changed my life. It lit me up like a pinball machine. And I walked out of that house, and I was changed. Never been, don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Hell yes. And I thank God for that every single day, that I didn't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Now, a lot of times, I end my story there, and I say, thank you so much, and I go walk off. And I'm sure that's what they'd love me to do. But I just want to tell, and this is for the newcomer, because that's why I come to these things. All you people with time, screw you. No, I come to these things, and I'm happy to always speak because I like the newcomer to hear a story of real hope. This is real stuff. This isn't just words on a book. I'm a sick addict. I'm one of the worst. You'll come such an addictive personality. The fact that I've transformed in the way I have it, I'm 21 years sober, is not possible. So I'm going to end with this little I'll do my Reader's Digest version of this story. I apologize, Ron, but you're going to be a little over. But this is for the newcomer, and it's real. Where does the rubber meet the road in the stuff we talk to you about? Can you really get into a state of recovered coming here and doing the things that we talk about, amends and inventory and all these other things that they tell us we need to do? Can you get into a state of recovered? Can you really get a full effective 100 out of 100, 1,000 out of 1,000 effective mental defense against picking up alcohol or drugs? Can you get that? Yes, you can. And I did, and I didn't know it. How do you know? Especially when you're somebody like me who does both things, you know what I mean? The poor dooley, because, booze, I was in front of more, other stuff, not so much, the combination, never. And so early sobriety, here I am, I'd had all these cool experiences. This is post Paperboy experience, which is cool. And I got a phone call from a kid in the old neighborhood, Stevie C. And he called me up, and these were people pre-lunatics, heavy alcohol and drug culture. Now, they weren't any angels. They themselves had their own bouts, but I had left them long before. I used to play poker with them, and I'm a poker player. Anybody wants to play after, you can come see me. But I'm a poker player. I love to play poker. And so Stevie called me, and he's like, listen, we're having a poker game. Would you like to come? It's in my basement. My brother Ray, this one, that one, all the old school guys. It was like a Cheers episode. I'm like, oh, that sounds great. And so I was like, but even now, 2+ years of sobriety, I had the thought, and I said, you know what? Let me call you back. And I figured, let me call my sponsor. I hadn't put myself in that situation. So I called my sponsor just to run it by him. And I said, what do you think? You think I can go to this game? And my sponsor's like, I don't know. Can you go to the game? He's like, I'm not your dad. He's like, can you go? And I'm like, I know, but should I go? And he's like, I don't know. Where are you in your 9th step? Where are you in 10? Where are you in 11? Where are you in 12? Are you going to meetings? How's your prayer life? How do you feel? And I went through each thing with him, and I said, you know all this. I'm rock star right now. And he's like, all right. He's like, then go and have a good time. And if you get uncomfortable, leave. He's like, I don't know what else to tell you. I said, great. I walked into the place. I got myself a little 6-pack of Coca-Cola Classic. And I started to go in. I like the little bottles, the little Coke bottles. They get really cold in the refrigerator. I love that. And so poor Ron's like, all right, the soda, Richie, tell me the story. So I bring my soda. I walk in, and it was like an I Had Arrived moment. If you've ever seen old people, it's like a Cheers episode. They're like, hey, shit! I'm like, oh! And all the guys and who I haven't seen. We start playing poker, and I hadn't been in this kind of scenario since I'd had these experiences, and it's like a symphony of beer caps in that basement. And I'm an audio guy. Like I said, I hear everything. I know what's going on the table, and everyone who cracks a beer, and I'm listening up there, and I'm like, but now you're in an enclosed small basement, and you can smell the alcohol. The beer is wafting through the air, and I can smell it. And I hadn't really been in that kind of scenario, especially around poker, because gambling and alcohol can kind of have a messed up thing. And you know what I mean? Who's laughing there, you little gambler? And so now I'm having this and it occurs to me, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, all right. Like, I'm not bothered at all. I'm like totally comfortable. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, all right. And one of the kids, and I saw him as soon as I came in, the peripheral. I had auditory and peripheral. And the kid had a joint rolled behind his ear. And the kid goes like this, and he, remember that? And he goes to light it, and Stevie C goes, bro, Hessian. They knew I was sober. And the kid's like, oh, dude, I'm sorry, bro. I'll go blow it outside. And I'm like, oh, cool, thanks, man. And he goes outside, and I'm like, that was cool. Stevie C looking out for me, you know what I mean? The kid respecting their sobriety. I'm like, this is great. 2 minutes later, I hear, listen, straight alkies, it's AA non-approved stuff. And it's on a CD with a credit card. And I hear it. And I won't look. I freeze in my seat, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm frozen in my seat. And I hear it. And it's Stevie C, who just yelled at the kid with the joint. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I don't even want to look over, and I'm like, just no way. And then I hear it. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, what am I going to do? they pass it around. And I said when I started this, if it's free, it's for me. Man, that's true words have never been spoken. And when they pass something like that to me, I'm the guy who dives in face first. I get yelled at. Oh, Rich, come on. I'm that guy. Now, I haven't been around it in 2 years, and they hand it over to me, and the beer smell, and the gambling, and and they pass it to me, and I look down, pass it to the guy left of me. It goes, he's doing his thing, I'm sitting there, and I can't tell you, I went, yeah! I'd never seen, it was rat poison. All I saw was death and poison, and I don't look at it that way. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, I gotta go tell my sponsor that just happened. Like, I was excited. So I said, I'll be right back. I had a pager. We don't have cell phones. Like, I got a page. So I had to run to a payphone. Kids, you have quarters, and you put it in this little box, and you press, So I run to a payphone, and I call my sponsor. I'm like, bro, you're not going to believe what just happened. I explained to him everything I just told you guys. And I said, and it was poison. I can't believe it. And he's like, that's your 10-step promises, baby. And he's screaming into the phone. And I'm going, 10-step. Everyone in ShopRite is probably like, what's a 10-step promise? Because I'm screaming it into the phone. I can't tell you how excited I was. And so it got quiet, and my sponsor goes, so what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm going to get the hell out of there. And he goes, now you're sober, baby. And that's the truth. I had a sober thought. I got no business in that place with those people no more. And that's the sobriety. The fact that I didn't like any of that stuff was awesome, but the sober thought was, I got no business in this place no more. And I went back, and I didn't say you're a bunch of filthy drug addicts. I went back and said, thank you for the great time. I gotta go, because I don't look down on that stuff. God bless. If I could still do it that way, the right way, I probably would, but I can't, and I don't, and I got no business here. And so I made a polite thing, left the kid's house, realized, ran back in, grabbed my 6-pack of Coke out of the refrigerator, and off I went. Thank you, AA.
Thanks, Richie. That was awesome. So I'm Anthony, I'm an alcoholic. We're going to take a 5 to 10 minute break. And please don't smoke on the church property. We're going to have turkey sandwiches with Swiss and a side of ziti. And the bathrooms are down to the left around the corner. So let's thank Rich one more time.